Hi there, book friends. This week I read Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. When I think of fascism, the first thing I think of is this absolutely solid gold tweet. The second thing I think about when I think about fascism is a crowd of lively Italians in 1945 giving their dearly departed leader a very lively wake in Milan. And the third thing I think about is Starship Troopers. It's a great movie. It's got Dina Meyer, Michael Ironside, some other guy, maybe some other people. I don't know. When it came out in the 90s, I thought it was super fun. It's tongue in cheek with its militarism. The bugs are super gross. The action is really fantastic. It's fun. Its approach to its material felt very lighthearted to me, and the evident fascism that it was depicting didn't bother me at all. It was obviously a very tongue in cheek production, and I accepted it for what it was. I thought that the contrast with the utopian world of Star Trek, which is my favorite sci fi setting, was really apparent. Nobody would want to live in this kind of world. I had no qualms about Starship Troopers being fascist or any other kind of ist. It's clearly a satire, it's clearly a farce, it's clearly making fun of that kind of a society. I mean, when it came out, I was a teenager and an idiot, and I mean, I'm still one of those things. So, to me, if I perceived it as obviously a joke, I figured everybody else would too. But I learned later that the reception of that movie was a lot more earnest at first. It's since been revisited, and people think that it's a satire, which is correct. It's obviously a satire. So the book, though, I've never read Robert Heinlein before. I suspect I will after this. I've never read Stranger in a Strange Land, but I do want to read it. I was surprised to learn that this book was written in 1959. I thought that the source material for the movie Starship Troopers was much more recent, like the late 70s or 80s. So when I was reading it, I tried to keep in mind that this was written in 1959. Apparently, very quickly, and after Heinlein had been coming off a series of books for kids. In 1959, the United States was between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It was 15 years after the end of World War II, so that probably influenced a lot of the author's feelings about the military. So our main character is Johnny, Juan Rico. He is an 18-year-old kid. The first thing that happens is that he signs up for federal service, which is this world's version of the military. It's the 23rd century. The world is united under a single government, which came out of leadership from veterans of combat after the collapse during some world wars of apparently all of the nation states. If there is an exact timeline, I missed it, but the book doesn't spend a whole lot of time dwelling on it. This Earth has outer space colonies and FTL travel, and it doesn't dwell on how any of that stuff works. It just works. It's not that kind of sci-fi book. It's just the background to everything that happens with the characters. So we have a space navy that delivers what are called capsule troopers, and they fight on other planets against a variety of enemies, including the bugs, which are the famous enemies from the movie, but there's another race in the book too called the skinnies. The book starts off with almost like a combat tutorial in tone, which is great because that's how video games like this start off too. Johnny drops in his capsule and wrecks a whole bunch of stuff on a skinny planet and gets taken back up to the ship, and then it jumps back in time, and we deal with him signing up and how he got to this point. The story is kind of your basic Bildungsroman. Johnny completes basic training. He fights as a trooper. He signs up for officer training and eventually makes it his career. He initially signed up because he wanted to become a citizen, and the object that he has to become a citizen is eventually secondary to his dedication now to fighting for humans and human society. So if you've played Helldivers, you understand what this book is like. All of this stuff in Helldivers comes from Starship Troopers, either the movie or the book. It's just sort of a legally distinct Starship Troopers. The game seems to take a lot of inspiration from the book in terms of its combat, and in terms of the tone, it's a lot more like the movie. I would include some gameplay of Helldivers 2 here, except I didn't want to record it on account of I refunded that game because it's not fun to play. For me. Hated the character movement. Overall, I was mixed on this book. I think if it were released today, we'd call it a YA book. I think there's maybe a decent war story in terms of the friendships that Johnny makes and the action sequences. There are a bunch of exhausting diatribes which feel like the author vomiting out all his cool ideas for how society should be. It's hard to tell how seriously he took all of these because I don't have any other Heinlein books in my experience. The story, though, it's all secondary to the cool military stuff happening. The language is fun. I enjoyed reading large parts of this. And it lionizes self-sacrifice for the good of the state, which can be good or bad. We can talk a little bit about fascism. When I think of fascism, I think of a society where the state is all, and the leader is the culmination of the state, and so the leader is all. Here, I think it presents more of an idea that the society is all. There's no individual leader, but it's all worth fighting for because it's your fellow man, and it is worth it to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of your fellow man. So I think this is more of a quasi-fascist society that he has set up. The focus on giving of yourself for the good of another, because it is virtuous and good and right to do that. To me, it's almost more of a depiction of selflessness and love, rather than idolizing the state or the state's embodiment. In this book, we don't have a dictator, we don't have a central figure, we don't have an autocracy. The military veterans who formed the leadership of society got there by doing military service, and that's it. The recruitment process is depicted as difficult to get in because they try to discourage people from doing it, which is self-serving, of course, because they're only getting people that really want to be there and making it so that people don't make mistakes by signing up for something that they're not ready for. Many times in the book, it's depicted that it's hard to get into the military, but it's super easy to get out with no shame and no hard feelings. It's not that there are some people who are good and deserve the franchise. It's that some people do this and they deserve the franchise. There's not a hierarchy of sorts other than served or didn't serve. And the book makes it clear that when you're serving, you have no vote. Only when you're out, when you've completed your term of service and become a full citizen, do you have the right to vote. I also think this book suffers severely from a really unrealistic lack of opposition to the way that this is set up. There is some talk of people not liking this, but it's all hand-waved away. And that's why I bring up, I think it might be considered a YA book today. This society doesn't work if you examine it closely. It's kind of insidious, this nice world that the book shows us. It's this order and this hierarchy, and we're all fighting for victory together. Some things I like here, this is just funny, but characters repeatedly solve interpersonal problems with ass-kickings. I like just constantly relying on ass-kickings to settle all disputes. That's good and funny. More books should do that. The language and the tone can be very fun. I have some examples here. There is a bit of a whiplash sometimes between the way characters talk when they're talking to each other versus how they talk when they're being formal or pro forma, and I thought this was a great example. The fleet sergeant looked over my papers and said glumly, "Apparently you both are almost insufferably healthy, except for holes in the head." And then he's got their documents ready for witnesses to sign. "I invite and require you each and severally to examine these exhibits, determine what they are, and to determine each independently what relation, if any, each document bears to these two men standing here in your presence." That's a great bit of legalese. I love that. The descriptions are really lively, talking about the main drill sergeant in basic training. "His chin was shaved blue. His trousers were sharply creased. You could have used his shoes for mirrors, and his manner was alert, wide awake, relaxed, and rested. You got the impression that he never needed to sleep, just 10,000-mile checkups and dust him off occasionally." In this passage, it's about sleeping outdoors in a group in the freezing cold. I don't recommend it as a way to sleep. You are either in the outer layer, frozen on one side and trying to worm your way inside, or you are inside, fairly warm, but with everybody else trying to shove his elbows, feet, and halitosis on you. You migrate from one condition to the other all night long in a sort of Brownian movement, never quite waking up and never really sound asleep. This passage really sums up the way the book views sacrifice and duty. Our behavior is different. How often have you seen a headline like this? 2 die attempting rescue of drowning child. If a man gets lost in the mountains, hundreds will search, and often 2 or 3 searchers are killed. But the next time someone gets lost, just as many volunteers turn out. Poor arithmetic. But very human. It runs through all our folklore, all human religions, all our literature. A racial conviction that when one human needs rescue, others should not count the price. It's almost as though the needs of the few, or the one, outweigh the needs of the many. Also, the cover art on this book, this is an Ace science fiction copy, is just incredible. It's by James Warhola, or Warhola, I'm not sure how to say it, but check out some of these other things that he's done. Really cool dude, James Warhola. And oddly fitting for this topic. Underrated, cool dude. Now a whole bunch of things I don't like. I tend to try to have fun when I'm reading books like this, but the politics here could be pretty different to my own, and there were a lot of things I disliked. This is not something I disliked explicitly, but this is the book's tone. War is controlled violence for a purpose. The purpose of war is to support your government's decisions by force. The purpose is never to kill the enemy just to be killing him, but to make him do what you want him to do. So there's the thesis statement for the military. Not too different from our own real world. This is okay. So if you've seen the movie or have read the book, this book's ancient, so spoilers abound here, but the character's mother is killed in an attack by the bugs on the city of Buenos Aires, and then his dad enlists in the military after, which is just, come on. And then the text here is just, I cringed. I had to perform an act of faith. I had to prove to myself that I was a man, not just a producing, consuming economic animal, but a man. Okay. The book explicitly endorses corporal and capital punishment. I disagree with both. This is about a murderer from their unit who had deserted and then had been captured and tried and executed. This is Johnny thinking about him. Well, if there was no way to keep it from happening once, there was only one sure way to keep it from happening twice, which we had used. Talking about rehabilitation. And suppose he escaped before he was cured and did the same thing again, and maybe again. How do you explain that to bereaved parents in view of his record? I couldn't see but one answer. And then here are some outright politics. There are a lot of passages like this. I will just read this one and leave it to your imagination for the rest. Bear in mind that this is science, not wishful thinking. To vote is to wield authority. It is the supreme authority from which all other authority derives. The franchise is force, naked and raw, the power of the rods and the axe. Whether it is exerted by 10 men or by 10 billion, political authority is force. Talking about why societies collapsed. No attempt was made to determine whether a voter was socially responsible to the extent of his literally unlimited authority. If he voted the impossible, the disastrous possible happened instead, and responsibility was then forced on him willy-nilly, and destroyed both him and his foundationless temple. Kind of sounds familiar. Superficially, our system is only slightly different. We have democracy unlimited by race, color, creed, birth, wealth, sex, or conviction. And anyone may win sovereign power by a usually short and not too arduous term of service, nothing more than a light workout to our caveman ancestors. But that slight difference is one between a system that works, since it is constructed to match the facts, and one that is inherently unstable. A world that works, So as I said, I'll spare you more, but there's a lot of this stuff. Also, this book is 1950s sex ed film strip level horny. Women are really just objects in this world who are good at flying spaceships, but that just is amidst their other admirable physical qualities as far as the narrator is concerned. Here we have two female clerks coming out, one old battle axe, one kind of cute. Here's another, he's at dinner. I would most happily have sat by the junior midshipman. She was awfully pretty. There's a lot of examples of this. I guess it's accurate enough given that the narrator is supposed to be 18 to 20 years old in this book and probably really did think that way, particularly in 1959 when it was written. It probably didn't stand out, but there is quite a lot of it. I think the point would have been made after one or two examples of this. You get it, you're thirsty. Okay. As far as other female characters, they are terribly underserved. Again, I don't think this is surprising given when and where this book was written. There's a mom who, she lies down, she gets shocked by people eating a lot, she goes to her room, she lies down. After Johnny enlists, she writes him a very maudlin letter. I assume she went to her room right after writing the maudlin letter. Then she gets killed in the attack on Buenos Aires, and she dies, and that's that. That's it for Mom. Another female character is the captain of one of the ships that Johnny is serving on. She learns that Johnny is bad at math and promptly starts tutoring him an hour a day. So we have a mom character, a teacher character, and it seems everybody else in this world is just a skirt to chase. And there are so many pages of tedious troop movements and commands and grid formations and yada, yada, yada. And God, I don't care. I don't care. It's so boring. I got bored reading this. But there's so many exciting combat moments when Johnny is a capsule trooper. It's written so effortlessly and almost comic book style. And then you have lots and lots of tedium. I got very bored. There's dozens of pages of imaginary army details, like what the ideal officer to enlisted ratio is. Very tedious to me. And there's also some really awful racist dialect for one character in particular, but thankfully these are very, very brief moments. The character does not last long in the story, and in 1959 it probably wouldn't have even stood out. So in conclusion, mixed feelings on this book. I would call this like a 3 stars. I liked some bits of it with regard to the action sequences and the fun descriptions and dialogue. I thought that a lot of the viewpoints expressed were not great or simplistic or bird-brained. Just a lot of things I didn't like here, so any recommendation would be qualified. The movie's way better. Star Trek is way better than it. Live long and prosper, everybody. Thanks very much for watching. See you next week.